Then Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Las Vegas Bowl matchup between the Florida Gators and the Oregon State Beavers. Both teams have got very different storylines heading into this matchup, and it makes for a pretty intriguing bowl game here. You got Florida, who is 6-6 on the season. This team is definitely in a rebuild phase right now with Billy Napier, first-year head coach, but this team has taken a couple of alarming losses down the stretch. But they can bring some optimism here as they take on Oregon State, who is one of the top teams in the Pac-12 this season. The Beavers on the other side are definitely on the rise right now. This team has had a really impressive past couple of seasons, especially this year, finishing out the season at 9-3. And here they are taking on Florida in what is one of the most intriguing matchups of the early parts of bowl season. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with their team trends. Florida lost to Florida State, 38-45 was the final score there. And once again, this team is 6-6. They barely got up to bowl eligibility, but they did it. And it's been a difficult season for the Gators and really a roller coaster of a season. I mean, this team, they've had a couple of impressive wins down the stretch, but at the same time, they've had a couple of very concerning losses. In particular, that Vanderbilt loss this team just took a couple of weeks ago. And that's a team that you do not want to lose to if you're in the SEC. And yeah, Florida did it on the road back in week 12. So for Florida, this team's 6-6. This is an important game for them to bring some optimism to this program as we head into another long offseason for the Gators. And for Oregon State, I mean, this is a team that's playing really well right now. They just beat Oregon to finish out the regular season 38-34. They're 9-3, ranked 14th in the country. And yeah, once again, they've really come around down the stretch. You got a Florida team that's kind of been down, facing off against an Oregon State team that is a pretty hot football team. I mean, this team really came around down the stretch. They're on a 3-game winning streak. And I mean, if you look a little bit further than that, this team has won 6 of their past 7. Games be on Saturday, December 17th in Las Vegas, Nevada. Kickoff is 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Spreads going with Oregon State by 10. So the Beavers, despite going up against an SEC opponent in a bowl game, they're favored by over a touchdown. The over-under is 52.5, and the FPI is going Oregon State 57.1%. So the FPI is making this game, or saying this game is going to be closer than what the spread's saying. The spread's saying Oregon State could win this thing by a couple of touchdowns at least. Even though, I mean, it's reasonable to think that, given that Florida down the stretch has not played particularly well. They're also a very inconsistent team, but I do think Florida, I mean, people shouldn't be sleeping on the Gators in this matchup just because they haven't played, or they didn't have a strong finish this season. But this is also the first matchup between Florida and Oregon State in their team's history, so that makes it also an intriguing matchup here. Stat comparison: Florida, they are 46th in points per game, 88th in points allowed. They're 87th in passers game. The main strength of this team is the backfield. The rushing game for the Gators, they're 16th in the country, averaging 213 rush yards a game. And for yards allowed, they're 81st in passing, 98th in rushing. As for Oregon State, this team is a solid defensive team, even though offensively they have shown definitely potential at times. They're 50th in points per game, 17th in points allowed, 111th in pass yards a game, 26th in rush yards a game, and then for yards allowed, 84th in passing, 15th in rushing. So this team down the stretch has been really good defensively. And something I will say too, Oregon State on offense, I mean, especially in the first half of the season, there were a couple of bad performances by this offense, but I mean, down the stretch, this offense has actually really improved. They've scored over 30 points in their last 3 games. They scored 38 on Oregon, mounted a huge comeback there to finish out the game. And so this is a team that's come around on offense, and with their quarterback Ben Goldbranson, this team has played generally really well. But of course, the rushing game has been the main strength for the Beavers, with the top in the backfield being Damian Martinez, who's rushed for nearly 1,000 yards on the year. And if you compare that with Florida, Florida's got their top running back, Montrell Johnson Jr., who's rushed for 10 touchdowns and just about 830 yards on the season. So that's your main strength, is the rushing game. Also, Anthony Richardson has rushed quite a bit for the Gators, but the passing game really hasn't been a big strength for either team. So if you look at who's better in the rush defense, Oregon State is much better in the rush defense at 15th in the country there, so something to keep in mind. Recent matchups: Florida lost to Florida State 38-45. There's that loss to Vanderbilt 24-31. I mean, that was a very unexpected loss. They're coming off of a dominant win against South Carolina, which, by the way, the very next week, South Carolina beat Tennessee like 63-38. Then the week after that, they beat Clemson, and suddenly South Carolina's in a pretty good bowl game. So Florida beat South Carolina before they got hot, and that was a very impressive win. So for them to lose to Vanderbilt the next week just goes to show how unpredictable some teams in the SEC really are. But I mean, they got Texas A&M, who beat them 41-24. That was an impressive win on the road. But of course lost to Georgia the week before that 20-42. As for Oregon State, beat Oregon 38-34, beat Arizona State 31-7, beat Cal 38-10. So really played well down the stretch. Oregon was a top 10 team when the Beavers beat them. Lost to Washington 21-24. They turned out to be a really good team eventually as well. Pac-12 in general was a very interesting conference this season. We'll get into more about that in a second. But Beavers also beat Colorado 42-9, and in general, this team really came around down the stretch. Your key points for this one: Florida 6-6, Gators clearly in a rebuild phase right now. But I do want to point out, I mean, this team, they were a contender in the SEC not too long ago. You look back to 2018, 2019. I mean, this team was a big contender in the SEC, and they made it to New Year's Six bowl games. And so, I mean, they've fallen off a bit the past couple of years, but I do think, I mean, with time, I think Florida's going to get back to where they should be. But as of right now, yeah, it is alarming seeing where this team is as of right now. But they got talent. They're just too inconsistent. Main strength is the rushing game for the Gators. And so, obviously, the first year in new coaching tenure, Billy Napier, I mean, it's going to take time with any coaching change. I mean, usually the first year isn't very good, so we'll see where Billy Napier leads Florida to in the 2023 season. But as for Oregon State, this team, this is a team that I think some are underestimating. This team, they've won 6 of their last 7. They turned out to be a top team in the Pac-12 this season, which once again was a very interesting conference. You had the top 4, who was USC and Oregon and Utah and UCLA for most of the season. Those 4 looked solid for a long time, all the way through October. And you kind of had Washington and Oregon State kind of in the background, just behind that top 4. And then eventually Washington and Oregon State both had really solid finishes to the season, really good Novembers, and turns out Washington finished out as second standing wise in the Pac-12, and Oregon State not too far behind in 5th at 6-3 in conference. So it's turned out to be a really good season for the Beavers. And I mean, the past couple of years in general, this team has really come around. So both teams have been on different trends, but I do think the future is bright for both teams. And yeah, for Oregon State, a strong defensive team. They got a great backfield, and that's why this is an interesting matchup. You got a Pac-12 team who's ranked 14th in the country for a reason, going up against an SEC team. And obviously the SEC is the strongest conference in football, so there is some weight there in that 6-6 record. But that said, let's get to the prediction here for Florida and Oregon State coming up here in the Las Vegas Bowl. And I'm going to be going with Oregon State here 31-24. I do think Florida puts up a fight here, keeps this game close, but straight up, Oregon State, they're the better team right now. And Florida, the way they've played down the stretch, they're very inconsistent. If Florida plays at their best, they can definitely beat Oregon State. But we haven't seen that their last couple of games of the regular season. I think Oregon State at this point, I mean, the Beavers down the stretch really played well, and at 9-3, I like the Beavers a lot. This team, they've really found their stride, and I mean, defensively, that's kind of been the main strength of this team, and offense has really come around. So I've got confidence in the Beavers here, and I'm going to go with them to win this one 31-24. Give me Oregon State 55%, over under 52.5. I'll be taking the over for this one, and Florida to cover the spread in the end. I could see Oregon State win this game by a couple of touchdowns, but I do think Florida puts up a fight here and at least keeps this game close. But that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.